Back in the days when I was writing television drama and casting actors in a couple of TV series, I could tell you the moment when the actor got the part. With Audra McDonald, who was already a Tony winner, it was when she walked in. She owned the room before speaking a word. With another actor, it was when he leaned on a word in a line in a very surprising way that I didn't expect when I wrote it. And with someone else, it was when she smiled through lines when others were fighting back tears over those same lines. And so, leaning on my now very much faded authority about the audition process, I have the strong suspicion that in Todd Blanche's audition, he got the part when he said this.
As to whether or not I want this job, I did not ask for this job. I love working for President Trump. It's the greatest honor of a lifetime. And if President Trump chooses to keep me as acting, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate me, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and I go back to being the DAG, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and asks me to go do something else, I will say, thank you very much. I love you, sir.
I don't know that I've ever seen anyone more afraid in front of a Justice Department microphone. I mean, he sounded kind of terrified there, but I love you, sir. That was the moment. That was Todd Blanche's audition moment that got him the job, because that was the moment when Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyer, now is acting attorney general, and as of late last night, Donald Trump's nominee to be the next Senate-confirmed attorney general. That was Todd Blanche saying to Donald Trump, I will do anything for you. I mean anything. That was Todd Blanche debasing himself publicly in his audition for a Trump cabinet post more desperately than anyone else in Trump world who has ever engaged in the process of publicly begging for a job from Donald Trump. Republican senators confirmed Todd Blanche in his first Senate confirmation proceeding as Deputy Attorney General. Todd Blanche did not do so well in the nonpartisan evaluation he submitted to in a Manhattan courtroom, where he defended Donald Trump against 34 charges of business fraud in Donald Trump's scheme to pay off the porn star Stormy Daniels, to buy her silence about her very brief encounter with Donald Trump in a hotel room when Donald Trump's third and current wife was home with their 4-month-old baby. Stormy Daniels testified under oath to that jury of New Yorkers who believed her. Donald Trump did not testify in his own defense. That left his defense in the very weak hands of Todd Blanche, who managed to get Donald Trump 34 guilty verdicts from that jury, who decided beyond a reasonable doubt that Stormy Daniels was telling them the truth and Todd Blanche was not telling them the truth, and that Donald Trump was, in fact, very, very, very guilty. So Stormy Daniels was more credible with that jury than Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche's lies work with most Republican senators and most Republican members of the House of Representatives, but they have never worked anywhere else, as that jury showed. Utterly stupid, morally wrong. Those exact words came from the former Republican leader of the United States Senate, Senator Mitch McConnell, who will have a vote on Todd Blanche's Senate confirmation. And this time, Senator McConnell might not be as sure a vote for Todd Blanche's confirmation as he was the first time, because on May 21st, Senator Mitch McConnell said, so the nation's top law enforcement official is asking for a slush fund to pay people who assault cops. Utterly stupid, morally wrong, take your pick. So there's Mitch McConnell, still one of the most important players in the United States Senate, saying Todd Blanche, in his official conduct as acting attorney general, has been utterly stupid, morally wrong. And that is why, when the current Republican leader of the Senate, John Thune, who learned the ways of leadership under Mitch McConnell, was asked today if Todd Blanche will have a hard time getting confirmed as Attorney General. The Republican leader said, quote, "Hard to say." That is not what Republican Senate leaders usually say when a Republican president nominates an Attorney General. They always greet the nomination enthusiastically and guarantee confirmation. And there is usually no reason for the Senate Majority Leader to think there will be any problem confirming any member of the cabinet for the president. But today, John Thune is saying, hard to say about Todd Blanche. Senator Thune said, "This is an environment where nothing's a safe or sure bet these days. It is the same environment in which enough Republicans in the House of Representatives defected yesterday to join the Democrats in passing a war powers resolution to stop Donald Trump's war in Iran. In the United States Senate, Republicans already joined Democrats in a vote on a similar war powers resolution that passed the Senate against Donald Trump's war in Iran. And so, in, as John Thune put it, an environment where nothing's a safe or sure bet these days, Todd Blanche is now being offered to Republicans in the United States Senate as the next poisonous vote Donald Trump is asking them to cast. Especially poisonous for Republicans running for re-election in the Senate facing strong challenges from Democrats. Those Republicans running for re-election will be asked to vote to confirm the architect of Donald Trump's slush fund, who is also the architect of Donald Trump's amnesty from prosecution for any tax crimes he may have committed in the White House up to now. We heard last night on this program, with the breaking news of Todd Blanche's nomination, that Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, thinks it's possible that Todd Blanche's nomination will not win enough support of Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Whitehouse went down the list of Republicans on that committee, and he mentioned, among others, Senator John Cornyn of Texas as one of the possible defectors, especially after Donald Trump supported the scandal-plagued Attorney General of Texas against Senator Cornyn in the Republican Senate primary, which Senator Cornyn lost. So Senator Cornyn is now one of those Republican senators who was defeated in his re-election campaign by Donald Trump himself. And now, the day after Sheldon Whitehouse identified John Cornyn as a possible vote against Todd Blanche, CNN's Manu Raju reports, Senator John Cornyn told me he's undecided on Blanche as AG. Being Attorney General is probably one of the hardest jobs in the cabinet because you're working for the president, but you're also supposed to be able to tell the president no. So we need to talk about that. In his Senate confirmation hearing, will Todd Blanche be able to credibly tell Senator Cornyn that he has ever said no to Donald Trump about anything? The oldest United States Senator, 92-year-old Chuck Grassley, is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he used the old math today to calculate the chances of Todd Blanche's Senate confirmation.
Based on the proposition that every Republican on the committee voted for him less than a year ago, and based on the proposition that every Republican senator voted for him a year ago, the answer is yes.
Yes, Senator Grassley's right. If every Republican who voted for Todd Blanche for Deputy Attorney General votes for him for Attorney General, he will be confirmed. But today, John Thune said that's not the situation we're in anymore. And today, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who's running for re-election, is one of 3 Republicans who voted against the Trump-Blanche slush fund on the Senate floor, a vote Senator Collins obviously believes she has to cast to be re-elected in Maine. So, can Susan Collins vote to confirm the person who Mitch McConnell called utterly stupid, morally wrong, as Attorney General, and defend that vote to Maine voters in November? Can she vote for the architect of the Trump-Blanche slush fund? Retiring Republican Senator Tom Tillis, who eagerly welcomed Donald Trump's cabinet announcements at the beginning of the Trump presidency, said this today.
I haven't made a decision yet. The key for Todd or anybody going through Judiciary Committee is being pretty tight on January the 6th. They better not have said for 1 minute that the people that beat up police officers like these right down here were righteous people. You come even close to saying that, you don't have a chair of getting my vote in Judiciary.
Okay, so if you're even close to saying that the Trump Blanche slush fund can go to people who beat up police officers, Tom Tillis has promised to vote against you. So here is Todd Blanche testifying that people who tried to kill police officers would be eligible for the Trump Blanche slush fund that Todd Blanche himself designed.
Mr. Attorney General, this is an outrageous, unprecedented slush fund that you set up. Simple question, will individuals who assaulted Capitol Hill police officers be eligible for this fund?
Well, as it makes plain, anybody is
just let me know if they're eligible for the fund.
as was made plain yesterday, anybody in this country is eligible to apply if they believe they were victim of weaponization.
Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you this. Are there going to be rules that say that if you've assaulted a Capitol Hill police officer or committed a violent crime, you will not be eligible? Why not make that a rule?
I expect that, because I'm not one of the commissioners setting up the rules, I expect that there will be rules.
You're appointing 4 of the 5 members, aren't you, Mr. Attorney General?
Pardon me?
You're appointing 4 of the 5 members.
I am appointing all 5 members.
You can certainly set up the rules. I would hope you would make a rule that anyone convicted of assaulting a police officer or a violent crime is simply not eligible. They should not apply.
Well,
let me ask you this, because you compared it to the Keepsiegel case. But I think you know full well that in that case, the settlement agreement was approved by a federal judge, including the payments to people who were not originally parties to the lawsuit. No federal judge has approved this fund, have they, Mr. Attorney General?
no federal judge did approve this.
If that's not good enough for Tom Tillis, then Tom Tillis is, once again, just not telling the truth about what will actually decide his Senate vote.
If there is one value Donald Trump has made it abundantly clear he treasures above all others, it is blind, unswerving, slobbering loyalty. He values it over competency and principles, over his own political party affiliation, over the rule of law. And Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's tenure atop the Justice Department has been defined by exactly that. So now Donald Trump is rewarding him for it. Here's Trump yesterday.
Tomorrow, I'm instructing Dan and everybody else that's involved in that very complicated process, which is going to go, I think, very quickly, that we are going to make him permanent Attorney General.
Permanent Attorney General. If you're wondering how Todd Blanche, a man who actually surprisingly now faces an uphill Senate confirmation battle, secured Trump's vote to be nominated for the top job permanently, look no further than Todd Blanche's dogged pursuit of Donald Trump's agenda of retribution and the complete politicization of the Department of Justice. For Todd Blanche, that comes seemingly without any limits. And he's done it in the barely 2 months since Pam Bondi was fired and Blanche was appointed acting AG. Almost as soon as Blanche assumed that role, he hired Trump ally Joe DeGenova. Joe DeGenova was hired to breathe new life into an investigation into former CIA Director John Brennan. Donald Trump, of course, blames John Brennan for the intelligence community's investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Todd Blanche led the effort to indict former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, a frequent target of Donald Trump's political attacks, for posting a photo of seashells. Todd Blanche approved an investigation into former Trump aide Cassidy Hutchinson. Hutchinson testified before the January 6th Select Committee about Donald Trump's role in stoking the events of January 6th. Todd Blanche also worked to vacate the seditious conspiracy convictions of members of the militia groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, for the crimes committed during the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. What a record, right? But there's more. Todd Blanche also oversaw the criminal prosecution of the civil rights organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center. Todd Blanche fought tooth and nail to defend, to actually sell to Congress Donald Trump's pet $1.8 billion slush fund, even as members of Trump's own party balked at the potential of buckets of cash going to people who assaulted police officers and were convicted for doing so. Even today, Todd Blanche is giving Donald Trump one of his most highly desired prizes in his insatiable quest for revenge. Our colleagues Ken Delanian and Carol Lenig report that former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton has agreed to plead guilty to a single count of retaining classified information. John Bolton could face up to 5 years in prison and a $2.25 million fine. John Bolton had been facing potentially more years than that. And while it remains to be seen whether Todd Blanche can make it through the Senate confirmation process and be the full-fledged AG, something that just 14 months ago was a guarantee for any Trump nominee because of the willingness of Republicans to greenlight everything. Now it's at least a question. But no matter what happens next, the stain that Blanche's blind loyalty to Donald Trump has left on the Department of Justice will live forever. Todd Blanche not only undermines the Department of Justice in which he once served and now leads, but takes aim at federal judges as well.
These activist judges that they have a robe on, but they are more political, or certainly as political, as the most liberal governor or DA. And you can't forget that. You can't forget that. A judge doesn't get a special place simply because a robe is put on them. My guys, the men and women that work at the department stay up all night, get an appeal in, stayed, go back to the district court judge. Judge still wants to just do whatever he or she wants to do. We need you because it is a war, and it is something that we will not win unless we keep on fighting.
So war against those judges, and you should win. Why? Because you stay up all night? Unsurprisingly, earlier this week, federal judges publicly warned that attacks by people like that and elected officials have eroded Americans' confidence in our judicial system. Donald Trump's continued attempts to dismantle the Department of Justice as we know it, brick by brick, is where we begin today with former federal judge Michael Luttig. Also joining us, New York Times investigative reporter Mike Schmidt, plus former DHS chief of staff during Donald Trump's first term, Miles Taylor, is here. Let me deal with the one of the big stories of the day with you first, Mike. The news that the New York Times is reporting that John Bolton is expected to plead guilty to one count of retaining classified information. What do we know about how that came to be?
Look, the government had an enormous amount of leverage over Bolton in the sense that even if he went to trial, he lost, he could have faced decades in prison. And putting aside the merit of the case and whether it was brought as part of retribution and such, from Bolton's perspective, that was an incredibly risky thing to be confronting, of decades in prison. But by taking a plea deal, he will be essentially narrowing the amount of time he could potentially go to prison. Look, the Bolton case has always sort of stood out in the retribution bucket. It's clear that Donald Trump wanted John Bolton prosecuted. It's clear that he wanted all of this to happen. The issue in Bolton's case is that the case had been brought by career prosecutors, which had been different than some of the Comey and James cases, which had been brought by more politically appointed prosecutors. And on top of that, the indictment against Bolton, if you read it, had a fair amount of his own texts and messages and such that showed his, exchanging of classified information. And look, one of the biggest issues that Donald Trump has had in terms of retribution is that he was told during his first term that you should not talk about the government going after your enemies, because if the government eventually does do that, the public will not trust what the Justice Department is doing because they'll believe that the Justice Department is doing it at your behest. Obviously, Donald Trump had completely ignored that, but it leaves us in a position today of saying, okay, did John Bolton accept this plea agreement because indeed, the government had a legitimate case against him, or did he accept this plea agreement because the Justice Department went after him and this was the best, outcome that he could have for himself?
Miles, you argue that this had very little to do with the law. Explain.
Well, look, I mean, as far as classified information cases go, Nicole, we are talking about a candle flicker versus a wildfire. And by a candle flicker, I mean John Bolton is alleged to have kept private diaries. He is not alleged to have taken documents home with classified markings. Compare that, a man who kept private diaries to write a book. He's not alleged to have put a single piece of that classified information in his book. Compared to Donald Trump, who took hundreds of pages of classified documents intentionally out of the United States government, kept them for what prosecutors were apparently prepared to allege was for personal self-interested reasons, refused to hand them back over to the United States government, was charged with it, and had the case dropped. The Trump case is vastly bigger, and he wanted to come back into government and find similar cases against his enemies. That's why I say this is not a plea deal. This was a shakedown. Now, the reporting indicates that some of this began during the Biden administration, but by all appearances, the Biden administration pretty much let this one go. Then the Trump administration comes in, his top officials get briefed that there was an open case into John Bolton, and they apparently get very excited about it, from the CIA to the FBI. So, look, what I would say is this. Doesn't appear that this is actually about the law or professional judgment. At the end of the day, this is about revenge. And John Bolton said something when he first got charged. He referenced a quote, Nicole, that you've used on this program before, of the head of Joseph Stalin's secret police in Russia, which was, "You show me the man, I'll show you the crime." Do any of us really think it's a coincidence that a dozen people who have written books critical of Donald Trump have been threatened by him or put under investigation? It is no coincidence. They showed the man to the Department of Justice. They went and found the crime. And I think this is a much, much bigger story about the threats to democracy, because Trump's revenge tour, because of this success, is going to enter its next phase.
Well, Judge Ludig, I guess the next phase begins officially with Todd Blanche. I mean, Todd Blanche has overseen the attempts, the unsuccessful attempts to indict Jim Comey, and the then successful one to indict him over the Seychelles. He's overseen and defended the attempt to settle with himself, with the IRS, is what a judge seemed to surmise. He went to Capitol Hill and had I think the legal term is chutzpah, to try to sell a slush fund for insurrectionists to Republicans who have a political boot on their throats because of Donald Trump's war with Iran and the ailing economy. I mean, Blanche is the attorney general that Donald Trump has been looking for since early 2017, when he was first reported by Mike and his colleagues in the New York Times to want Comey indicted.
Nicole, every word that Todd Blanche spoke on that replay at the beginning of your show was despicable and reprehensible. Prior to the Trump administration, there's not a public official in the land who had ever said anything like what the president himself has said and Todd Blanche just said about the federal courts and even the individual judges on the federal courts. That said, obviously, Todd Blanche was there and in many other instances has simply been parroting the words of the President of the United States. Todd Blanche is a classic puppet of the man in the highest office in the land.
Joining us now, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, Hofstra University law professor James Sample, who focuses on constitutional law and democracy, New York Times reporter who covers the Justice Department Glenn Thrush, and New York Times opinion writer covering national politics Michelle Cottle. Glenn, I'm going to begin with you on this. What made Donald Trump want to move ahead and drop the acting title for Todd Blanche?
Who knows? But look, I think it had a lot to do with the fact that Trump is somebody who doesn't like to be on the defensive, right? So he's really taken a wallop over this weaponization fund. The fallout is currently happening on the floor of the Senate right now. He is likely to face some kind of a consensus on some amendment shooting this thing down permanently. So what does Trump do whenever he's cornered? He does something to put himself on the offensive. And putting Blanche forward is just very much in keeping with the Trump playbook. It allows Trump to sort of lean into all the decisions and say, this is my guy. He followed my instructions. And it saddles Republicans with the dilemma that they always have to face. If they oppose him, will he have the power to come after them? This is just one of those, are you with me or against me dilemmas that he always puts them in whenever they decide to show a little backbone.
Let me play a little bit of Tom Tillis and Bill Cassidy talking about the weaponization fund, and we'll extrapolate from there.
Do you take the acting attorney general at his word that the fund is dead for now, or do you want to pass a bill to specifically outlaw it in the future?
I want to make sure it's not mostly dead. I want to make sure it's completely dead. I just think it's bad. It's bad optics for the president. It's bad optics for Republicans in its current form. We got to either eliminate it, streamline it, guardrail it. It can't go in its current form. And if that's the only choice we should have, we should eradicate it.
You know, I'm gonna try hard not to talk about the bolo tie, which just seems to get bigger and bigger by the day. Let's talk about the substance of what he was saying. If you have Tom Tillis and Bill Cassidy, Lisa, both saying that they don't trust this attorney general enough to take him at his word, I guess what should that tell you about him as a confirmed attorney general?
Well, there's this tension, Katie, right, between the Todd Blanche who has done everything necessary to win Donald Trump's trust to be his nominee, and the Senate, which wants to see that Todd Blanche has maintained some independence that we expect from any attorney general. And I want to say, don't sleep on John Cornyn. Hell hath no fury like a senator scorned. And John Cornyn this morning telling Punchbowl News, I'm going to read to you the quote. The problem with the Office of the Attorney General is that there's basically, well, you are a member of the president's cabinet, but you're also the chief law enforcement officer for the country, and you're not the president's lawyer. So I'll be asking some questions, getting some commitments on that. And I suspect that if John Cornyn does not get the commitments that he wants to get unambiguously, he has a larger problem than just Bill Cassidy and Tom Tillis. That's a Cornyn problem. And as you mentioned, that could bleed into problems with both Murkowski and Collins, too. But Todd Blanche will be acting as the attorney general, not only for a 210-day period that started on April 2nd, but once the president submits his nomination, he can be the acting attorney general until the Senate acts on that nomination or it expires. So at least through the very end of the year, Todd Blanche will be the acting attorney general. And that's something I think folks are going to have to reckon with, too, in addition to the politics surrounding his nomination.
One of the things that I didn't even get to in that list that I laid out, that very short list, was the accusation from Pam Bondi that Blanche was the one in charge of the redactions in the Epstein files, and basically blaming him for all the problems with those redactions, including the survivors who were revealed within it. Michelle, is this going to be a Republican breaking point? Should we expect it, or should we expect what we always see, which is, they're always finding a way to go back to Trump?
So I prefer to look at it not as breaking points, but I think the analogy that I've liked is the off ramps. So he's always giving them more opportunities for a few of them to get off on an off ramp and find their spine or whatever. And you've got these YOLO Republicans. I mean, Tom Tillis, Bill Cassidy, John Cornyn. Why wouldn't they? It's the Bobby McGee lyrics. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And that's where they are. So if you have enough of these guys who are like, we're done, we don't have to worry about him, this is their opportunity to take that off ramp. Now, I don't like to predict anything with this group. It's just, you never know what they're going to do. But this really should be a moment for them.
All right, so let's talk about what happens if he does get Attorney General as the title and doesn't have to keep doing acting until his time runs out. What are you watching for, James?
Well, I mean, I never met Todd Blanche. I didn't. His career was respected before he became the Deputy Attorney General. And look, his work for Donald Trump as his personal defense lawyer is something for which I have immense respect, even if you are not a fan of Donald Trump. The worst people in the world deserve great representation. That's an easy thing. But what is difficult here with Todd Blanche is the dual role. And the dual role is one that he doesn't seem to want to eschew at all. In fact, he keeps leaning into it. The Attorney General is not the Attorney General for the President of the United States. The Attorney General is the President for the people of the United States. Now, does the President have a lot of influence? Should the President have a lot of influence in terms of who he chooses, who gets confirmed? Absolutely.